I'll just jump into it. So first of all, thank you so much for inviting me for this event. I am so honored and happy to be sharing some thoughts about testing from this side of the world. As already said, I am originally from a small island of Mauritius in the Indian Ocean, and I work in South Africa currently, but I also studied in Europe. So very much, I'm one of those people that we come from such a small island. We are eager to explore the world and get to understand how we are similar but different at the same time. So my topic for today is around the future of testing in scaled agile models. And let me just share my screen. Let's just double check if you can see in presentation mode. Just put that.
Yes, we can see it.
Thank you very much. So my talk today is around this. It's a really hot topic in where I am in the current customer base that I'm working with. And I thought it'd be nice to explore this subject in a bit more detail. And what a nice way to also get your views around this. So we know that every time we talk about the future, it can be quite scary. And we know that one of the best way to deal with it is to also be part of the creating force that helps shape our future. So what am I going to cover in terms of my agenda? I would like to just have a quick look at the current context, how things are currently, the challenges that we experience, and then deep dive into my topic, which is what are the ways to deal with scaled agile testing and the future that we are looking forward to. Some of those concepts is already happening now, depends on which side of the world you are. And we'll just then end with a Q&A. So agile evolution, we are currently in a world of global digital transformation. Agility is everywhere, business agility, IT agility, DevSecOps. These are all the buzzwords we are dealing with. As part of that, what we are seeing practically, really want to tackle the practical side of things, is you can see with the event of for example, in the South African market, in the African market, currently, the big drive is around moving to the cloud. And it's been talked about for many years. And currently, everybody's going to the cloud, and a lot of questions are being asked on how do we test in the cloud, depending on the different models that we are entering. There's the embracing of IoT devices, globalization, AI-based type of frameworks. So the testing complexity is slowly increasing, or should I say complexity, but it's really, currently we experience this as complex, and we can now say it is increasing. Scale agile frameworks are now also popping everywhere. Some of the popular models, as you can see on my screen, we talk about the SAFe model. Spotify has been around for a while, but SAFe is gaining a lot of momentum, and the LESS model, and there's many more, Scrum Alliance, and all these great scaling agile models are here. And one of the things I've observed is testing in a small team is it's quite nice. We understand the science behind it. There are many talks about it, but when we walk into a big corporate and we are now in a world of scaling agility, you notice that the testing practices, there's a bit of a gap. There's a bit of a drop in an understanding of how do we not only scale agility, but also scale agile testing as well, or scaling testing as part of those models. And that's the topic I deep dive in this talk. So we need to adapt our practice and we need to evolve. And that's one key thing that one needs to bear in mind. And over and above all of this, in this bigger world of modern IT, where we talk about the likes of AI, we talk about DevSecOps practices, we know it's a elephant in the room where we talk about people trying to find means and ways to make testing expenses go down? How can we perhaps scale down the testing competency, the testing departments, the testing capacity that is available in an organization when we use these big models? Because there is an assumption that these models, they sell the dream of built-in quality delivery at speed, right? So it is a big selling point in most of these models, that we will have built-in quality. There is better focus on the different criteria of software quality characteristics. So how do we, is this a reality on the ground? That's the big question. And what we've observed, and it's also been a hot topic in the conferences since last year, there is an elevated trend of broken software in the wild, be it in web-based application, trying to book flights, going to machines where you're trying to book your parking ticket. The usability, user-friendliness of it is not 100% making sense. So that is a bit of a reality that is happening across the globe. So what is the era that we're entering in the testing world? Well, everybody talks about continuous testing. So we are definitely in an era where in the 90s, in the 2000s, we were talking about shift left. Well, now it's here with the practices of DevSecOps and AI and all these, with Agile as well. We talk about having quality from the get-go. So in the testing world, I believe we are in what we call our continuous testing era. The goal being to test every step of the way. So if you look at the latest publication from Janet Gregory and Lisa Crispin, they talk about it. We are expected to test through the life cycle. It's a nice place to be, right? We always wanted to promote for testing to be a continuous effort. But the challenge is, how do we do it in a practical way? And how does it actually happen? There's a difference between saying that we need to do continuous testing and practically implementing it in a way that is, again, that word, sustainable. So how do we make sure that all of this is actually sustainable, and add in that concept of scaling agility as well? How do we do continuous testing at scale? So in my team, I work in the quality assurance industry, in the testing industry. I also work in a lot of the digital transformation world, where I help drive automation initiatives. So there's a big discussion we have amongst our advisory team is, yes, there's a motto out there. Globally, we talk about shift left, test earlier, show earlier, and how do we practically do that? All right, so let's just take a step back, right? Typically, if we look at agile testing activities, what do we expect to happen in a two weeks sprint? So I just want to bring your attention to these key activities. So as a tester, I'm expected to help validate and verify user story. I'm also expected to do cross user story dependencies. So I call that feature testing, which, to be honest, a lot of times is missed. I will cover that at a later stage. But the key thing people focus on is on user story validation and verification. The type of testing levels and testing disciplines that we bring in is functional testing, performance testing, automation. We are expected to drive all these type of testing activities at all levels. So what do I mean by level? Is the task level, the story, feature. So this talks to your traditional learning around unit test, system integration test, and user acceptance test. So all these different levels of testing, we still are expected to look at that. Support user acceptance testing, because obviously in agility, it's all about being customer focused and supporting quality products being delivered. So we are expected to support user acceptance testing, also deliver assistance in driving defect management. Now, because in Agile team, we also take care of the product end to end. So from project lifecycle to production, we also get involved as testers in fixing incidents in production, and we get involved in that lifecycle as well. Over and above, there's also your good old testing approach. You would at least like for your testing approach policies and practices to be in place, metrics and reporting. Participate in all the Agile ceremonies, that is from sprint planning to backlog grooming, retros, demos, and also obviously your release testing that is expected to happen. So these are all the activities that are expected to happen in 2-week cycles. So it is a lot. And what ends up happening is we drop the ball. Some of these things it becomes a thin layer that starts to happen instead of that deep level type of testing. And obviously, Agile, in the Agile construct is being driven by Scrum Masters more often than not. And they now will drive and push for delivery to happen. And they may not necessarily understand the importance of all these activities that should also be happening. And I like this picture on the top here that I wanted to also bring in, because my experience on the ground observing many teams is testers end up doing a bit of story test. They look at the acceptance test and perhaps a bit of feature story dependencies. And most of the time, then they just help in user acceptance tests because of lack of time. So there's definitely a lot of challenges that we are currently experiencing on the ground. So that talks into my next slide. What are the challenges that we are experiencing in those Agile models, in those scale Agile models at many customers? First of all, there's this concept of hybrid. Many people argue that doesn't exist, but the reality on the ground is you are dealing with project managers and Scrum Masters, and sometimes organizations think that we do not need a testing competency, so there's no test management in place. So as a tester, you are not sure, are you testing in a waterfall model? Are you testing in a Scrum ban, a water Scrum? What is the model, the SDLC model that you're working in? So that can be quite frustrating for Agile testers and frustrating for testers in general to understand what model to cater for. Ambiguous requirements. That has been solved many times. Agility doesn't mean no documentation or no discussion about what is it that we need to test. So alignment is key. But how do we achieve alignment in a world, especially post-COVID? There was this importance put on being people-focused, having regular conversation. So we are talking now about living in a world of hybrid remote workforce. And how do we bring this alignment in? We are expected to communicate constantly. There's a need for continuous feedback loop, but this is not really happening. And the reality on the ground is we have ambiguous requirements that land up. Another big challenge, I mean, each of these, right, could be a topic on its own. I'm just highlighting them. And it's a wider conversation. We can have this conversation afterwards in other forums. But here, I just wanted to highlight some of those key challenges. Testing versus quality. As testers, yes, in Agile world, we put on bigger hats. We become champions of quality. We try to get people to think about quality in the product, in the software delivery. However, we still have a job to do, which is to test. And the testing is to validate and verify. I've seen a lot of times in squads, in Agile teams, testers are doing so much of championing of quality. There is no actual testing happening in the team, except for that user acceptance test, validating that acceptance test criteria have been met. So that is a something to think about and to wonder, how do we make sure that we are also testing and doing our validation and verification testing techniques. Other points are tools versus humans. This seems to be a hot topic. I'm on the side that it's not a question of either or. I believe in the both. I believe tools are there to enhance the human experience. Tools are here to enhance our experience on Earth, and they are here to help us as testers to do a better job. They are here to enhance the testing competency. So I'm not on the side of just using humans for testing or just using tools. I believe we need a combination of both. The real discussion is the balance and how much do we need. And I believe that conversation becomes more context driven. And that's something we can talk about again in a bigger subject. But yeah, it is a challenge. Testers are being challenged every day that we would like to replace you with an automation testing tool. How can we perhaps have one tester work for 10 agile teams because they believe tools have replaced that human face-to-face testing, understanding of how to test a user interface, picking up those complex things, doing exploratory testing. It's still something that we are having to promote and convince people of its importance, I believe, to this day. Moment of involvement, another important point. It's an interesting one because I believe us as testers, we also need to be trained to work in the domain of agility. Just like working in any domain, if you're doing game testing, if you're working in casinos or you're working in the metaverse, you need to understand the domain. So testers also need to understand the domain. And a lot of times they don't know enough about the domain, like ceremonies in Agile world, to understand when they should be involved. And a lot of times testers are still involved during the sprint execution phase, and they're not really involved enough in the earlier planning activities. And if you're in a safe world, we talk about PI planning or release planning, all these type of activities, testers are not always correctly involved, right? And the other big challenge that I see is really around doing more with less. How do we achieve that? So we're in a world where everybody talks about let's do more with less, but product confidence comes with better test coverage and more in-depth testing. Is that the right way to just be okay, to have a high risk appetite where we just go to production with just user acceptance testing? That's where, that goes back to my point of we're living in a world where we have a lot of broken software floating around, right? So what is the future? What are the things we need to look and focus on in scale agile testing? What should be, where should we be aiming for success? That's what I would like to focus on. So for me, the first point is around addressing the skills gap, making sure that we have learning hubs. We are learning about better ways, understanding the domain of agility, of DevSecOps, understanding the latest ways of testing in those constructs. We need to understand the context, and understanding that specific context will help us. As part of that big point as well, I'm talking about the skill gaps in automation, in technical testing. As we know, there is, I believe, a major skills gap in technical testing. So we should try and address it, understanding how to do security testing. I come from a background of security testing and performance testing, and I don't know how many times I've been approached for growing that skill set in organization, and test automation is one of them as well. Exploratory testing. So there is a need to address the skills gap to meet the demand. So it's not that there is no demand for testing. The demand for specific testing competencies is the challenge that we're experiencing right now. So testers nowadays need to be aware and make sure they are in a continuous learning mode. They can understand the latest model out there, and that's how we're going to also bridge that gap in knowledge and skills. When we talk about scale agile model, I also believe there's two important things that one needs to understand: value-driven mindset and the skill system thinking. So system thinking, most of scale agile models talk about it. We are living in a world where we drive value streams, value stream models, value stream mapping. So if you are in test leadership, the way you report, the way you look at metrics to report testing needs to evolve. You need to talk to your audience. Remember, half the battle is in the testing communities to be able to communicate the value of what you do in the testing community, the value that you bring in risk mitigation. So by you bridging the gap in understanding value stream mapping, understanding those models, this will help you understand how to adapt your reporting model, adapt the metrics that you report on at an executive level. And also, I believe that is important to help us in understanding how to set up our different teams, the context of testing, the processes, all of that will be very much aligned to us having that value stream understanding and value-driven mindset. Critical system thinking. So again, Scale Agile model talk about system thinking. Yes, we need to understand that we're testing a component. When we are looking at a user story, we're looking at a feature, we are doing that. But as testers, we mustn't get lost in that world of just testing a user story. We need to be clear that there is still a system thinking. What are we looking at? Are we building the right product? Are we building the product right? That thinking must not disappear. A lot of the good basic foundation of testing have been questioned, and I believe we need to bring them back in and incorporate that as part of enabling agile testing at scale. So system thinking is one of them. We need to understand if we are working in an organization that is driving that, we need to be driving and focusing on end-to-end testing and bring that conversation in. The other point, test process improvement, testing techniques. Absolutely, we need to be looking at ways to improve our processes, ways of thinking. Like we look at one of them, which is system thinking. How do we bring that into process improvements to make sure that what we are doing is fit for purpose? And again, testing techniques. My predecessors that just did their talked about some of those new testing techniques that exist. So one needs to be looking at them, researching what is out there, what are the better ways to test to make it suitable for this world that we live in, which is everything needs to be fast-paced, everything is globalized, everything is needs to happen in with lesser information available. So how do we deal with all of this? What are the better techniques that are out there that can help us do testing and still deliver value to our customers and still help the customer make the decision? Can we go live? Is this software good enough to go live? Have we fixed as many defects as possible? Have we done our part as testers in verifying and validating the product? Last but not least, another important factor is that cross-team collaboration. Like I said, once you're part of this agile team, a lot of people are forgetting the importance of also cross-team collaboration, doing root cause analysis workshops, integration testing efforts, driving testing mind maps and bringing, if we're testing a big solution that involves many teams, we need to be connecting the dots and doing those cross-testing team collaboration. So for me, this slide talks about the key factors that one needs to think of, that needs to be brought in your strategy, in your discussion, in your forums on improving our experience of enabling agile testing at scale, because it's not going anywhere. So just zooming in a little bit on the practices. I'm just checking time. Yes, I think I still got time. So talking about practices, very important to so these are just some of my thinking where I've gone based on my observation and reading. I sincerely believe these are some of the practices that one needs to bring into our scale agile testing practice. So firstly, risk management. So we are working with product owners and scrum masters, and a lot of time, like I said, they may not understand testing, so we put that hat of as QA champion. So I believe we need to encourage the agile community that risk management is important. Putting prioritization and understanding complexities, dependencies, and risk of products by doing a simple activity like this, understanding your high-risk product but low value, high value, by them mapping that upfront, mapping these things upfront will help us, the testing community, in driving better risk-based testing, planning and execution, right? So I believe it's an important thing that is often lost, and we need to make this a very important point to be driven in organization. And I believe that will help us solve half the battle of what is the scope of testing, and with the limited time that we have, how can we test what is the most important? So by having the bigger, wider organization drive proper risk management, it will help us. The other one is test-driven development approaches. How can we simplify our life of testing? I believe we need to make use of this living playbook for testing, and test-driven development approaches drive that. especially behavior-driven development, we have our feature file, our system file that will give us this language that given when then, and give us this focus on building the product right and building the right product. And it allows us to actually align with everyone, being the product owner, the developer, the test automator, the testers that are floating around, the testers that are dedicated to the team. By having this living playbook and make this a central alignment point for everyone, I think will be very key to helping us scale agile testing. This is a paper that I was reading up. I always like to see if there's any research being done in the international market. So this paper was published in the Journal of Systems and Software. And oopsie, just remove that. And you can see there are research out there on how to adapt behavior-driven development for large-scale software system. So already, if we look out there, what are the latest techniques, practices that one can do? You will see, for example, they found a gap in BDD with regards to architecture gaps. So they say we need to have, we have feature file, but we must also develop for skills. At scale, we need to develop system feature file as well. And we need to have a constant feedback loop. So I'm not going to go in the detail of this. You're welcome to go read that paper. But the reality is there are research out there on how to have adaptive BDD, for example, at scale to bridge the gaps and make sure that we are properly driving quality and testing across the pipeline. And I really like that focus on testing across the pipeline. Okay. Other practices, obviously, we're looking at automation practices. It's a non-negotiable. Why I put it on the slide is really just to say automation practices are really improving. One needs to look at AI-based, one needs to look at the model-based, the faster, better ways of driving test automation. One cannot be stuck in the past and try and bring this into scale agile testing models. I believe in the future we'll have a lot of playbooks for a lot of the systems. It's already existing, but I'm seeing a trend, at least where I am, of people now selling playbooks. There's already scripts already created to help in that process of integrating automation testing in the pipeline. Remember that first picture I showed you where we want to really test continuously. So automation is obviously going to help in that activity. We can't be there all the time. We're not going to be working 24/7, but automation will help us achieve this better coverage, which is great. And 100%, I believe the direction we're going with scale agile testing is more and more focused on context-driven testing. Best practices are there, that's great, but we will have to adapt our best practices on the context. Every customer, every country, every industry will have a specific context in which we will apply the best practice. We will need as humans to really practice critical thinking, apply the best strategy. I don't think we have a document that will work. We cannot just say this is the standard, it will apply everywhere. I believe the standards are there to give us a good foundation, and we now need to be pragmatic and apply what's fit for purpose. And I believe we've been doing it for a while, but it's never been verbalized so well. And in the agile world, it's becoming so important to apply it. To have a blueprint and think that it will work everywhere is no longer feasible, I believe. One needs to be more pragmatic, apply what's best for the current needs, and get testing going. So as part of that, we have tools. I'm not going to focus too much time on that, but there are tools out there, visual tools that are one needs to also bear in mind. I believe that will still play a big role in helping us in having the right conversation, understanding when to automate, when to bring the right people, and have those conversations with the agile community on understanding what type of testing is required. Not going to focus too much time, but I believe it's important to remind ourselves that these are visual tools for conversation. These are visual tools for understanding what to focus for planning purposes. And we all need to have visions in mind, and test maps, mind maps are also great tools that one needs to think about. So explore all of this and find out what would work best for your organization. The last slide on practices is really just focusing on two things, which is around building resilience in system and understanding the need to have that center of excellence, testing excellence in organization. Resilience, why do I cover this? Well, Scale Agile model is selling the dream of accelerated delivery. With that being said, we need to now, there's been a rise in how do we, in this focus on building resilience of systems in production. And with that came that focus on my favorite two subjects, which is performance testing and security testing. In my entire career of testing, performance testing and security testing, it's very, very hard to get people to spend money on doing these activities. But with agility at scale, with accelerated delivery, I believe performance testing and security testing is a non-negotiable. Yes, it's being now automated more and more in the pipeline. Static code analysis is now one thing that we are driving, but I 100% believe that performance engineering practices is a non-negotiable. If you're building a strategy around scaled agile testing, these two concepts cannot be left lost. In actual fact, this is becoming more and more important, depending again on the industry that you work in. And in my case, most of the industry I deal with is in the financial industry. So these are very, very important. And also in the online sales industry. So when it's time to do bigger sales, performance is important and security is definitely non-negotiable nowadays, especially if you're taking more risk in delivering things to production. Right, and the testing excellence, for me, it's really just to bring back this point that many organizations moved away on having this excellence group, that competency, so call it community of practice, test leadership. There was a trend where we were removing that and we were telling Scrum Masters must now be being the line manager for testers. I believe we need to bring back test excellence leadership. They are the centers of excellence for testing in companies. And I believe they will be the one driving the right conversation on enhancing testing techniques, making sure that people are getting trained. There are regular discussions on best ways of running tests in the organization. Test QA coaching, these things needs to be brought back in because I feel like testers are lost or not getting the right support or not always understood. So I believe by having those center of excellence, it will bring back that balance, which was always needed. I also think that testing is becoming global. So even if we are sitting in South Africa, we are now in a place where we can do 24/7 testing by connecting with people from Egypt, from the Philippines, from India, from the US. So we are changing this world. And yes, I'm not again saying we need to go in extremes, but it's really just bringing all of this together to allow scale agile testing to truly work. I believe global testing excellence will work to also address the skills gap that we have in certain countries. By leveraging expertise across the globe, we bring our world together and we are getting a better experience and delivering quality product. So that's for me the key thing that one needs to focus on. And with that being said, that was a mouthful. I rushed through a little bit because of time. But in essence, that's really what I wanted to say. At the end of the day, testing is a core competence. It's like writing code. We always will have to test. We always have to quality check everything. And testing plays a fundamental part in quality checks. So testing will ride the waves of change. Today, it's agility. Tomorrow, it will be something else. In 10 years' time, it will be something else. But testing will be there. It will have to evolve. It will have to be more context-driven. It will always require the use of tools. It will evolve based on the trends in the market. You will see now there's a trend for back-end software testers and front-end software testers. There's a trend for agile testers. There's a trend for specialist anti-money laundering testers. So we will have to always watch out what's on the market, learn and adapt and practice our core foundation testing practices. So with that being said, where do we start? If you are currently experiencing challenges in your agile testing world, in your organization, or at your customer side, I believe you need to start by trying to implement as many continuous testing feedback loop to get a better understanding of where and what to improve. Also, relook at your testing engagement model. Is it the best? Do we need to bring back that leadership, that test leadership that brings best practices and better ways of doing things, and influence leadership in supplementing the right quality focus? Identify your champions, and as always, people, process, technology. It's a formula. It's there for a reason. We need to focus on the people, the process, and also the technology that helps with automation. So we cannot survive by just looking on one specific variable. We need all of them. And that's me. I really hope you found value in this presentation, and there was it talked to my topic, which was really focusing on the future of testing, understanding where we should be going, and I hope you found value in it. Thank you very much. And now it's time for Q&A, if we've got time.
Thank you so much for this beautiful presentation. It was really nice to see your vision on all of these agile testing methods and all of the procedures, all of the tools and stuff. So there are 3 questions actually. The first one is, you have mentioned value, especially for test metrics. So how do one prevent analysis paralysis and the continuous argument on test metrics when measuring the project and product, but getting the focus on value? It's from Ezan Grobler. And
okay, great question. So I believe it's really, it's always going to be a hard conversation. Nowadays, we have time box sessions. I believe in this great concept of time boxing things. I think it was mentioned in the earlier conference the earlier presentations. Time box ourselves. We have 2 hours. We need to do our mapping. We have a workshop. Let's all agree. And at the end of the day, if we can't have consensus, we have to move away and come back. But we have to time box ourselves and have clear ceremonies, and that's one of the beauty of Agile world. They set us up to have specific forums to discuss things and time box it and then move on. The discussion around value, it's more for me understanding the value streams. If we understand what the business is trying to sell, where they, because at the end of the day, most organizations are trying to be profitable. They're trying to sell product and stay alive as an organization. They're trying to survive the market. So by understanding their system of value, where they find value, if we understand the value stream, we can also, as the test leadership, when we are reporting testing, fine-tune the way that we are doing that. And us now in a team, when we are also mapping risk will always be linked to understanding the value that we give to the customer, and understanding how do we rate value. It will depend on the variables that you decide. Is it cost? Is it the return on investment? So you need to find your variables in your organization that you quantify value, and then accordingly see the risk and do that mapping in those time box sessions and agree at a point. At least it needs to happen. Not having it is where I'm worried. It's really trying to make sure that there is a conversation happening around that point. And I hope I've answered this question. I'm just trying to be cognizant of time.
Okay, thank you so much. So the other question is, what is the right way to test automation in agile teams? Should it go separately from functional manual tests?
Yeah, that's a great question. I believe that it needs to happen at some levels in the agile team. There's a level of upfront automation that people are driving. I find this to be a very sore subject, because it's very difficult to expect a test automator to automate everything within 5 days. So my thinking is there is unit tests. So if we are bringing in BDD, for example, you already have a level of automation happening with using those, let's say, Gherkin files. It's much easier for a test automator to now add value. I believe in the Agile team, if we automate at a lower level, like APIs and things like that, it helps us it's quicker because there's low maintenance at API and unit level. And then testers will also have to test the end-to-end. So they may not be just in a Agile team. That's where I believe we need to have that center of excellence that drive end-to-end testing for releases. And that's something that's often missed. So we need to have that top layer that connects the team, the Agile squads in a scale Agile framework that allows us to focus on the end-to-end testing. So that cannot be time box in a 2-week sprint. It will be something that is continuous at the top layer, and we're continuously adding on to that library and testing end-to-end. So it's a hard sell. Most test automators are found outside the organization that I've worked with. Test automators are found outside the Agile teams, and they do not, they've asked to testing one, so it's release, they are one release behind basically, and they will drive automation of more regression at this point in time. So that's what I've observed, but definitely automation needs to happen in the current sprint at the API and unit level at least.
Thank you so much for the answer. And there is one last question from, again, Ezan Grobler. You have mentioned on another slide how to combine risk to value. Please elaborate.
Okay, yes, I actually answered this in my first question where I explained how we have to identify our risk appetite on the product and map it against value. So kind of answered that question earlier, if I'm correct. But basically, it's a matrix. If you go into risk management models, you'll see there's a whole science. Actually, even ICQB has started unpacking test process improvement models. I was reading a bit on the latest syllabuses, and they talk about that and the importance of bringing that back in. But it's really your management 101. Risk versus value and understanding how you in scale Agile models, they use WISC-GIF model, for example, for SAFe, weighted shortest job first, and they've got specific variables to manage risk and value and understand what should you be delivering first. So there's lots of models out there. Okay, so thank you so much for this beautiful presentation and all of your answers. It was really nice to see you here at Live2Test conference. So we're so glad to meet you here. I hope you enjoyed it also. Thank you. Looking forward to connect with the community. Thank you so much again for the opportunity to represent this side of the world. Thank you.